I'm Chris Barron, and welcome to the Breakdown. Today, I'm going to break down a Spin Doctor song that I wrote. It's called "Little Miss Can't Be Wrong," and I'm just going to play it. I've been a whole lot easier since the bitch that time. I've been a whole lot happier without a piece around. Nobody upstairs are gonna start the shower. Nobody at the back door gonna throw my laundry out. She holds the shotgun while you do it to do it. She won't let me to look at easy, so now been a whole lot easier since the bitch is gone. Little miss, can't be brown. Little miss, can't be wrong. Anybody gonna down now when you're gone. Little miss, can't be wrong. What you gonna do to get to another one of these here rock and roll songs? Other people sucks, the angel hear me dance. Would it be so bad to simply turn me around? You cook so well, all nice and French. You do your brains hurt too, mama, with your monkey ranch. Little miss, can't be wrong. Ain't nobody gonna down now when you down your gone. Little miss, can't be wrong. What you gonna do to get to another one of these here rock and roll songs? Oh, you can't be wrong. Did you keep it wrong? Oh, you can't be wrong. Keep it wrong. I hope them cigarettes gonna make you cough. Hope you have this song and it pissed you off. I take that back, I hope you're doing fine, yeah. And if I had $1, I might kiss the 99. Little bit, can't be wrong. Ain't nobody gonna down now when you're down your wrong. Little bit, can't be wrong. Do to get to another one of these here rock and roll songs. Little bit, can't be wrong. Ain't nobody gonna down now when you're down your wrong. Little bit, can't be wrong. What you gonna do to get to another one of these here rock and roll songs? Oh, you can't be wrong. Keep it wrong. Oh, you keep it wrong. Keep it wrong. I dropped my pick into the guitar. Yeah, people. All right, this is the Breakdown, and I'm Chris Barron. I'm the lead singer of a band called Spin Doctors. Spin Doctors are still together. I'm a songwriter. I'm a singer, and this show is about creativity and songwriting and living. All right, today's episode is we're breaking down "Little Miss Can't Be Wrong," and the title of the show is "This Is the Work." Subtitle. Last week, in the first episode, we were talking about two princes and how two princes almost didn't get written because I wrote the first two lines. 1, 2, princes kneel before you, princes who adore you. And I looked at it sitting there on the yellow legal pad, and I was like, that's stupid. And I almost stopped writing. What I was working on at the time was differentiating between these different voices. Last week's episode was called Various Voices. We talked a lot about the creative voice, which was the voice that came up with those first two lines. What stepped in afterwards was the editing voice, saying, I don't know, that's kind of, maybe that's stupid. Now, this week I'd like to talk more about the editing voice, because the editing voice is kind of has a weird role in all this, because it's a little bit vilified, and yet people listen to it all the time. That voice in your head that's telling you, that you're not good enough, or that other people's opinions of you are what really counts. It's like that chatter that's going on in your head. Unless you really have your shit together, it's going on all the time. But at the same time, that's a really good voice. That voice wants to help. That voice is not trying to like sabotage you. That voice has really kind of no intention. It's just, it's just doing the job as best it can. So what happened was, in that moment, I turned down the editing voice, turned up the creative voice. Now I was 19 years old. So what happened was, that tune just popped out. 20 minutes, half an hour. But I like to contrast Two Princes with Little Miss Can't Be Wrong, because as opposed to Two Princes, which I wrote really quickly, which all kind of came out in a lump, Little Miss Can't Be Wrong took me weeks to write. I came up with the idea kind of all at once. But I wrote like 15 or 20 drafts of that lyric. It took me a really long time to hammer out that lyric. People are surprised, I think, when they hear that. People generally express surprise when I tell them that, because I think it sounds really like I just wrote it on the back of a napkin. I'm probably some of the drafts probably were written on the back of a napkin. But I think that's part and parcel of how you should write lyrics. You should write lyrics until they sound inevitable. And sometimes it's as simple as like just writing it down as it comes out of your brain, and sometimes it takes a lot of thought, and you have to sit there looking at each draft, looking for things that aren't working. Why does a lyric work? That's a whole other episode, and we'll get into that. But in short, every line in the song ought to correlate back to the big idea. Usually the big idea is encapsulated in the title, but it's not necessarily. Sometimes you have a weird title. Bob Dylan is the king of weird titles. All right, so I'm going to launch into a story. When I was 19 years old, I was at Bennington College. I went to Bennington College for a year, and just my freshman year. And I was in a band called the Dead Alcoholics with Boners. Yes, you heard it right. The Dead Alcoholics with Boners. And Bennington, as some of you might know, is very avant-garde school. Modern dance was invented there. It was the kind of place where if you drew a picture and it actually looked like an object, a real object, and wasn't abstracted completely from objects that you see in the real world, people were like, oh, that's so passé. If you wrote a play and it had an actual narrative to it, people were like, wow, lame. If you wrote a jazz piece that didn't sound like silverware kind of plunging and plinging down some stairs, people thought it was extremely gauche. And if you wrote a classical piece that didn't sound like silverware plinging and plonging downstairs, it was also considered completely gauche. Cut to me and Mark Okerman and John Myers. We started a band called the Dead Alcoholics with Boners. All of our songs are in the key of G. Most of them are Muddy Waters covers. This music is very, very rudimentary. And we play Springfest, and for some reason, at this completely avant-garde place, we take the place by storm. Probably because we were in direct contradistinction with everything else that was going on. So we're playing this very rudimentary music, and people are super into it, and we get to play at the Springfest, and it goes really well. So we're asked to do a party at Booth House, like the big party house, and I find myself at the bottom of a big stairwell with Mark Okerman, and there is a PA, a public address system, the speakers that the gig is going to come out of, at the bottom of this stairway. Gigantic. These speakers are huge. They were old in 1986 when this happened, 87. And they were just these gigantic, they must have weighed 100 pounds. I'm standing there at the bottom of the stairs. And Mark's like, okay, Chris, let's carry this speaker up these stairs. And I laughed, like a light silvery laugh, like ha 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 ha. Like, I'm the lead singer. I don't carry speakers, do I? And he was like, yeah, you do. And I was like, well, do we really need this thing? And he was like, if you want anybody to hear you. And I asked what I now know is the dumbest question in rock and roll, which is, can't I sing through a guitar amplifier, which is just a disaster waiting to happen. And he was like, no, man, not you'll sound like shit if you do that. And you'll break the amp maybe, like, we got to carry these speakers up these stairs or the gig's not going to happen. And in that moment, I had an epiphany. Because up until then, I thought that being a lead singer in a rock band was going to be like a hand coming out of the clouds with a magic contract. And I would sign the contract, and then like everything would be, like chicks and free drugs and limousines and, champagne for the rest of my life. And in that moment, I realized all I had to do to be a lead singer that night was carry those speakers up those stairs. Just get those speakers up the stairs, and I was a lead singer for the rest of the night. And I realized that rather than it being some kind of like magical thing that was going to happen at some point, being a rock musician was going to be a series of menial tasks that I'd have to execute every day. Wake up every day, figure out what I needed to do that day to continue being a rock and roll musician. And I'd get to be, and I'm still a rock and roll musician. That's what I do. That's the job. And so a lot of it was, back in the day, the Spin Doctors, when we were playing clubs, we would, this is how we would get our gear to the shows. I would get in a cab on the Bowery in New York City. Eric and Aaron, Eric, the guitar player of the Spin Doctors, Eric Shakeman, and Aaron Comas, the drummer, had an apartment on Elizabeth Street. So I would get a cab on the Bowery and get the cabbie to pull around to Elizabeth Street. And meanwhile, I'd be talking to him, and I'd tell him, look, we've got some amplifiers, some drums. We know how to load them into the car without messing your car up. Promise it'll be cool, and when we get to the club, we'll give you a great big tip. And we always tipped really well. And there were Chevy Impalas, and Crown Victorias, and we had one load for the Impalas, because the Impalas had a big spare tire in the trunk, and we had to put the bass drum in the front seat next to the driver, and we had another load in for the Crown Victorias because they were bigger and they had a bigger trunk, and we had it down. And we would we would take our gear to gigs in taxis. And then we got Jason Richardson joined us, and he's sort of like the non-playing fifth member of our band. A lot of bands have sort of, a business person who has been with them from the beginning and is, basically a member of the band but doesn't play. So Jason had a gold Duster in this car from the 70s. And we would load all the gear in there, and it was midwinter while we were using his car. And it was so crowded in the front seat. Jason would always ask us, he'd be like, hey, there'd be more room if you would take your coats off. But we refused to take our coats off because we were just busting his chops. And he wanted us to, so we were like recalcitrant musician children. We wouldn't take the coats off. So the four of us, me, Jason, Eric and Aaron would be in the front in our big overcoats in February, breathing steam into the car, and we were so crowded in there that I was sitting next to the door. I hope my dad doesn't know this because he would be so upset. I was sitting next to the door on the driver's side, and Jason was sitting in front of the steering wheel, and I would do the pedals with my feet, and Jason would steer the car because we were so crowded in there. One person couldn't do both things. Now, all of this is just to say, like, being in a band in New York City, it was hard, and we had to figure out crazy ways of doing things to get stuff done, to get to the gig, and what it turns out that a lot of jobs aren't what they seem to be from the outside. I mean, yes, my job is getting on stage and singing songs for people and playing guitar, and there's a ton of stuff that goes into it. There's a lot of like sleeping on terminal floors. There's a lot of, getting stuck at Tel Aviv airport for 17 hours because a volcano erupted in Iceland. There's a lot to it. And a lot of, just, I guess you'd call it grunt work. Now, I, as a person, I'm lucky. People talk a lot about talent. That's a real catchword. And it's like a funny word to me because if I have a talent, what it really is like being willing to sleep on the floor of a terminal. It's having a disposition where I don't mind doing all this stuff. Now, I am not telling you this stuff to like blow smoke up my own ass about, how hard I work or how much I've suffered. Because the truth is that I don't mind this stuff. I kind of like this stuff. And the reason is this is my life. I realized a long time ago that this job isn't, I mean, don't get me wrong, getting up on stage in front of people is a real buzz. It's wonderful. There's nothing like that sensation of like just opening your mouth, singing a song, just putting your heart on your sleeve and looking out at people and watching them sing along. And you can see, it's palpable that people are enjoying what you're doing. And when you've written a song like Little Miss Can't Be Wrong or Two Princes, people's response to songs like that, you can see, you can watch a couple thousand people all reliving all these memories. It's indescribable. If I could put it in a bottle and let everybody have a sip, there's nothing I would rather do. And believe me, you'd love it if you haven't done it. But that being said, a lot of this is it's the work. This is the work. I called this episode "This Is the Work" because a couple years ago I lost my voice, and I had a paralyzed vocal cord, and it was kind of a scary, somewhat crummy time for me, and I was doing a lot of, I was taking voice lessons. I take voice lessons. I take guitar lessons. I'm a big coaching junkie. And I was going to a speech pathologist, and I was doing these exercises every day, vocal exercises to get my voice back, and it eventually worked. But I don't like, I honestly, like, I don't really like warming up very much. I kind of fidget a lot while I'm doing it, and my mind wanders, and it's not my favorite part of the job. And I was doing it every day, and so I wrote on a little piece of paper, a little piece of paper like 2 inches by 2 inches. I just wrote, "This is the work," and I taped it up onto the full length mirror where I warm up. And you know, I would get ready to start warming up, and I'd be like, oh, "Here we go again." I'd look up at that piece of paper. This is the work, and I would just reach out and touch it. Boom, just touch the little piece of paper. And then suddenly, I don't know, it wasn't like perfect. I still don't really like warming up, but it kind of it grounded me, and it made me concentrate, helped me to concentrate. So when I got my voice back, my first gig was in Spain, and the first time I was on stage in front of people singing was singing a memorial for somebody who was sick at the time with Jose Merced, who's a flamenco legend. So I've never sung flamenco before. I wasn't gonna sing flamenco. I was singing a flamenco song. I sang it like my own way. But it was really scary, really intimidating. Everybody else was a flamenco musician. I went on and did sort of my rock and roll. It went over fine. But I was so terrified before I went on. And I looked up, and there was like, I was on the side of the stage. There was a piece of scaffolding and a little board with some stuff on it. And I reached out and I just touched it. Like that, the way I'd been touching that little piece of paper. And it just grounded me. So guess what I'm saying is, well, there's a lot to this, and part of it is during that time when I lost my voice, I kind of didn't do music for a little while. I started doing chess, and I was in this lesson with this guy, Rahim. This is a brilliant dude who has a degree from the Sorbonne in Paris in mathematics, and he's one of the guys in Washington Square Park who, like, I mean, he might be the best player in Washington Square Park. Rahim, very colorful character, and he'd give me these lessons, and he would like yell at me. He didn't know I was the guy from the Spin Doctors till way later, and he was showing me a position on the board, and it was, a couple of pawns. He moved a pawn forward, and he was like, "You don't need to understand chess to understand what I'm talking about here." Basically, he was like, "I move this pawn forward, it becomes stronger because these other two pawns are protecting it. And this knight over here becomes stronger because it's protecting the knight. But these other squares around it become weaker." And he said, every system in physics has a uniform amount of energy. Every system has a uniform amount of energy. So you strengthen one thing and another thing gets weaker. So the point is kind of that the work versus talent. If you're talented, I see a lot of talented people and they don't really want to put in the work. They're not willing to sit around and play the same four notes over and over again. I'm trying to convey this without making it sound like this, the process should be torture, because it shouldn't. It isn't. Because what I'm trying to convey here is that embracing this idea of working in this kind of way,
that's that's like meditation. Like, I'm sure some of you have meditated and some of you haven't. Meditating isn't anything more than putting your mind on a simple task, and and then other thoughts come in, and you keep returning to that simple task. Usually, it's breathing, but it can be playing the same four notes over and over again on a guitar, or it can be sitting in front of a notebook and working on a lyric, and just hammering it out until it's right. After after Pocket Full of Kryptonite sold, like, several million copies, I was I was pretty satisfied with myself, and I worked with Danny Korchmar, produced our record, You Gotta Believe in Something, and he just wouldn't let me give him a lyric that wasn't really, really tight and put together. So he would be like, "Show me the lyrics." So I'd hand it to him on a yellow legal pad, and he would just underline lines that he thought weren't very good. But if I could sell him a line, if I could be like, "No, it's a double entendre, here I'm saying two things at once," he'd be like, "Okay." But if I couldn't, I had to go and rewrite it. And that was such a great ass kicking for me. And he wasn't telling me what to do. He was just kind of being like, "You can do better than this." Um, so, what is all this for? It's for virtuosity. What is virtuosity? Why virtuosity? Virtuosity isn't being able to do a bunch of gymnastics with, like, what you're doing. It's not being able to write the most complicated lyrics. It's not being able to play the most complicated stuff. The purpose of virtuosity is expression, is being so fluent in what you're doing that you can get across your personality. So it's being good enough on a guitar to play guitar with a personality. It's being good enough at writing lyrics to really say what you want to say. Um, so we're talking about, your voice. What is your voice? Pablo Picasso was like, I don't. Somebody said, like, "What are you searching for in your art?" He's like, "I don't search. I find." Now, like, that sounds like, very mysterious. But the truth is, like, Picasso just had a bunch of facility at writing, and he knew who he was. And who are you? Like, what's your voice? It's sitting right there in front of you all the time. It's the stuff your grandmother used to say. It's the things you like to read. The stuff, little catchphrases of your own. My dad has all these, like, catchphrases that are really funny. I call them refrains. If he sees somebody who is, like, crossing the street carelessly, he'll be like, "He never looked. He never looked." He always says it twice. "He never looked. He never looked." And that's part of my voice. That's inside of me. These are the things I love. This writer PG Woodhouse, and he'll say something completely inarticulate, and then he'll be like, "And I meant it to sting." These are the things that penetrate you. The sounds of your, like, childhood. If you had a bird that used to sing out your window, the crackling of a fire. The memory of my mom used to sing out of this Joan Baez songbook to me when I was really, really little. I still remember it. That sound, the sound of her, reverberating in the hallway, and her long brown hair, and her singing, "Turn, turn, turn." That's part of my voice. That's inside of me. So it's your memories. It's the things that you say over and over again. Don't ignore that. That's who you are. That's your voice. And what you want to do is like work on what you're doing until you can bring that out. You get out of the way. There's this big jerk around. People talk about like, having a voice, finding your voice. You don't your voice is your voice. It's sitting right there. It's all you have to do is listen to it. To talk about voice as if it's something you need to find, but meanwhile it's just right there. So the search for originality is really a drive towards authenticity, and a drive towards courage. So I'm going to finish with a couple more stories. My dad was an officer in the Navy. And I was talking to him several Thanksgivings ago, and I was like, how did you get through OCS, Officer Candidate School? And that's crazy. And Officer Candidate School is like, if you're an officer, you got to go to boot camp, but you also have to like kind of go to college at the same time. So my dad was going to be a naval officer. And he was like, I very quickly realized that I was going to have to do three things to get through OCS. And that is such a classic answer of my dad. My dad is a very methodological kind of guy. And of course he broke it down to like three things he had to do. I was like, okay, Dad, well, what were the three things? And he was like, first of all, I realized I was going to have to get in amazing physical condition. The other guys in this program were all like 20. My dad was like maybe 26 or 27, which made a difference in like the exacting physical nature of the stuff they were doing. They had to, run this obstacle course in a certain amount of time. And my dad was like, I knew I had to like get it so that I could, beat this time in this obstacle course. It made a lot of sense. Of course, had to get in great shape. That's, everything you ever saw about boot camp, that's what's going on. And I was like, what else? And he was like, I had to learn celestial navigation. And I was like, right, because you were going to be a naval officer. And he was like, yeah, you had to be able to use a sextant. You had to be able to like navigate by the stars, because we had, this is the 60s. We had some navigational equipment, but, you had to be, if that broke down, you had to be able to like get the ship somewhere. Or if you were in a lifeboat or something, you had to kind of know where you were. Great, of course, yeah, the Navy, of course. Celestial navigation, right? I was like, what was the third thing? And he goes, I slept on top of my covers. And I was like, what? Why did you do that? And he was like, they'd come through in the morning. And it's funny because when I was a kid, my dad was always like, one of my dad's like stock things when my brother and I were sort of like whining about something. My dad was like, oh, well, when I was in the Navy, if we were whining about cleaning up, my brother and I, he'd be like, when I was in the Navy, you had to, they would bounce a nickel on your bed. They'd bounce a nickel. If the nickel didn't bounce right on your bed, they'd tear your bed apart. So I remember this story, about this. So my dad was like, I've told you, like, they would tear your bed apart if you didn't make it right. So I would sleep on top of the covers, because if they tore your bed apart, then you were making your bed. Everybody else was moving on to the next thing. You're behind. Then you're behind all day long. And then what would happen is you would start to like, get KP. You'd have to like scrub a floor with a toothbrush or something like that. And he's like, I watched those guys who had those kinds of penalties. I watched them fall behind and fall behind and fall behind. And he was like, it all started with the bed. And I loved that. I loved that about my dad. My dad has this great problem solving ability where the point is that some solutions seem significant and, seem like, of course, I must study celestial navigation. But some of them are more subtle and more silly. Some of the solutions are more silly. And there's a great story about this proposition bettor named Titanic Thompson, who spent a year learning how to chip a golf ball into his shoe, because he just knew people couldn't conceive of somebody who would work that hard on something. And he won thousands and thousands of dollars betting people that he could chip a golf ball into his shoe, because he spent a year chipping golf balls into his shoe. So, in conclusion, like, I've got, 100 notebooks full of crap, just shit I wrote blah, 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 blah. And a small amount of that turns into something that I can work on. In comes the editing voice. And then, once I've got something, then I'm chipping away at it. And if it takes me 3 weeks, it takes me 3 weeks. If it takes me an hour, it takes me an hour. If I have to play the same 6 notes on the guitar for 3 weeks, to learn something, I'll do it. Talent is one thing. You're never going to be the most talented person in your field. Rarely. It's so hard to be the most talented person. But people don't like to work very much. It's not that hard to outwork most of the field. And if you're willing to do that, man, you got a leg up on everybody. The story behind Little Miss Can't Be Wrong is it's my dad's ex-wife. It's my stepmom. She told me I was going to play guitar for the Rats in the boiler room of the high school where I was going to be a janitor. Nothing wrong with being a janitor. She thought there was something wrong with it, but I don't know. I think it's fine. And, here I am, making a living playing music, and that's all I ever wanted to do. So meanwhile, this is your life. I like to wake up at 4 o'clock in the morning and play guitar when I can't sleep. I do it a lot of days. It's kind of part of my workout. For a long time, I was like, what the hell am I doing up at 4 o'clock in the morning? This is weird. Time went on, and I was like, I'm getting tons and tons of practice in. I'm getting in an extra 7 hours of practice a week because every day I'm getting up at 4 o'clock in the morning and playing guitar for an hour. So, this is your life. And it's not about beating your brains out. It's about loving what you do. I love doing that. I'm not suffering when I'm sitting there playing the same 6 notes on the guitar, Sometimes it's a little bit frustrating. The chatter creeps in, and sometimes I'm thinking to myself, am I going to be able to do this? Should I have been doing this, 10 years ago? What the hell is wrong with me? If I can't do this right now, I'll never be able to do it. But you know what? After a while, I can do it. And you can too. I'm Chris Barron, and this has been The Breakdown. Thank you so much for joining me tonight. And I'll see you next week, Tuesday on Heard Music Television. I want to thank the Horse Whisperer, my buddy, who has been super supportive and helped me to get this whole thing started. And I love you guys. Thank you so much. And I'll see you next week. Tuesday, 8 o'clock, Heard Music Television, The Breakdown with Chris Barron. Thank you so much, guys. Bye.